Now that Spider-Man No Way Home is out, we have officially gotten 4 trilogies within the MCU. There is Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and now Spider-Man. I decided it would be a fun little video to rank all 4 trilogies of the MCU, and it's going to be kind of reviewing it based on quality of each film in the trilogy and how they work together and collectively how good they are in comparison to the others. All right, so let's get things going here. This is the 4 MCU trilogies ranked worst to best. Coming in at the bottom, it is the Thor trilogy. Thor Ragnarok is honestly one of the best films in the MCU, in my opinion. I thought it was hilarious. I thought that the action was awesome. Hela was a really good villain. There was a really interesting story about the family between Thor and Loki and Hela, as well as Odin. The film had tons of fun. It let itself be more of a funny and vibrant film in comparison to the predecessors. Thor Ragnarok did the impossible in many ways because Thor and Thor the Dark World are relatively forgettable. They're a little too serious. They don't really have great villains. They don't have a lot of things that make them so memorable and awesome as much as the third film. That's kind of why the trilogy naturally has to be at the bottom of my list, because while I got a lot out of Thor Ragnarok, quite a bit really, you know, lots of laughs for sure, I just didn't really enjoy the last 2 as much. I think the first Thor film has its moments. It's a pretty good fish out of water story. It's got good life lessons that Thor learns. There are some pretty funny moments with Thor being on Earth. The villains, I mean, save for Loki, are not necessarily memorable really. I think that the story is pretty good, but in comparison to the other origin stories in phase 1 of the MCU, it falls a little short and feels a little more forgettable. Thor the Dark World has really been considered the worst MCU movie by a lot of people, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I found that Thor the Dark World is just very forgettable, very bland in comparison, and I really didn't enjoy it all that much. I mean, there's moments in there that are good for sure, but it is definitely weak, and as a result, I think that the Thor trilogy really took its time to find itself. We'll see what happens moving forward with Thor Love and Thunder next year, but as of now, it is a trilogy and it is definitely the worst of the 4 in the MCU. Okay, next up on the list is going to have to be the Iron Man trilogy. I think that there's so many good things about the first Iron Man film, not just because of what it is now, just because it's the pioneer of the MCU. It quite literally is a good movie. It's got a really good story. It is exciting. We see Tony Stark get kidnapped by the 10 Rings. We see him push through captivity by building the Mark I, and he escapes and he becomes a superhero, and he's still so cocky and stuff because that's the kind of personality Tony Stark is. As a result, he's not perfect as a superhero. We have a really good villain in the form of Obadiah Stane. I think that he was a really interesting antagonist and one that was personal, obviously, to Tony. Robert Downey Jr., this was his first role as the now iconic Tony Stark and Iron Man of the MCU. It was just pitch perfect casting there, obviously, but like in the moment, that movie was just so awesome because it really was a fresh new superhero movie of a modern age, and Iron Man is still a really good movie. I think that it's more of an intimate story. I think that you just have a really exciting superhero origin story with some really memorable moments of Tony Stark being a badass and learning about Iron Man and how to become who he would eventually be. Iron Man 2 misses the mark quite a bit. It's a little shaky because it tries to set up things for the Avengers a little too much. It feels a little rushed, and the villains are not that great, although they should have been, especially when you see something like Whiplash, who could be so cool. Whiplash was just kind of strange and wanted his bird, and he was not a good villain, unfortunately, even though there was a couple moments where the action was cool. I mean, the action was good in this movie. I ended up liking Don Cheadle's Rhodey quite a bit, of course. There's a really good scene or two with him and Tony for sure, but Iron Man 2, while it introduces a lot of great characters, some of them are good, overall it just misses the mark. It could have been better, but it felt like it was just juggling too many ideas. I mean, I think that they could have done better with Justin Hammer too, because I think he was really good in this role, but just we didn't get enough of this character, so that is a miss, you know, and Iron Man 2 just doesn't feel as good as the first one. And then the third film is an interesting, divisive film for sure. Spoilers for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. We've now seen where they've gone with the Mandarin and that guy who Ben Kingsley played as Trevor, right? So I thought it was funny. I got a good laugh out of that, and I enjoyed the scene where he, you know, was being the terrorist, acting of course, but really really cool moments on screen there. And then Tony finding his way, to Trevor and being so confused and all. There was some fun moments in there. PTSD that Tony was having, done really well in this film. It's got a nice Christmas feel, and then Iron Man moments in there are always good, always awesome. Robert Downey Jr. always delivering. But Iron Man 3, again, a little bit messy. I think that I like this movie quite a bit, but the story could have gone a more traditional Mandarin approach, and I think it would have been better, though I guess we wouldn't have gotten Shang-Chi the way we did. Who's to say now, right? But the overall trilogy definitely follows Tony Stark's story well, but I think that 2 and 3 have flaws that keep them from being as good as the first Iron Man film. It is better than the Thor trilogy. I think that character development wise, it's better for Tony Stark, and the movies are better. That's kind of why, as you can see, I put it here on the list, because there's a lot of good things in there, but you'll see that as I talk about the next 2 trilogies, they just do things better. So coming in at number 2 on this list, the Spider-Man trilogy, Spider-Man No Way Home. I'm not going to spoil it because it is new, and I don't think that it's fair to spoil it in this kind of video. I've already done spoiler talks in other videos recently. Spider-Man No Way Home does some interesting things for Peter Parker's character. It really gives Tom Holland the chance to really learn some serious lessons in life and find his way. He kind of realizes where he's ended up as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man, and he realizes what the Spider-Man life is doing to people around him. Peter learns some lessons about being a hero throughout the trilogy. Spider-Man Homecoming does a really good job at giving us a first story of this new Spider-Man without being the origin story. We don't see the usual tropes. Instead, we get this movie about him being a student and being a high schooler, and Tom Holland really killing it in that role as Peter Parker as a high schooler, and Peter trying to manage being a student and being Spider-Man. And he has a really great dynamic and chemistry on screen with Zendaya and Jacob Batalon as MJ and Ned in all 3 films, and it starts off so good in Homecoming. Adrian Toomes proved to be a really good villain that was someone you cared for. Michael Keaton did a good job in that role in Spider-Man Homecoming. We got a fantastic villain in Mysterio. Jake Gyllenhaal delivered a really good performance. Mysterio was so likable, but he was obviously so bad behind the scenes. He tricked everyone really well. There were some cool visual effects in there. Far From Home is a little bit more forgettable than No Way Home or Homecoming, I think, because it falls right in the middle. It's a really good movie, but it just doesn't do as many things as, say, some of the older Spider-Man films, or as, this trilogy, its predecessor and successor do. In my opinion, Far From Home is really enjoyable, though. The trilogy follows Peter and his friends, and we get them to have good character development. It's all about him in high school and his storyline throughout that, becoming Spider-Man, being Spider-Man, and they sort of just don't do the old school tropes of origin stories, and that's why I like it. It is fresh. Tom Holland is a fantastic Peter Parker. No Way Home does some really awesome things. It's almost in its own conversation about just as a fan service Spider-Man film, but it does follow up some really interesting storylines in there, and it does some fantastic storytelling and great things that I don't want to spoil, especially in the second act of No Way Home. I think as a Spider-Man sequel, it is really good. I think it does things like I mentioned prior, just for Peter Parker, to make him a character that grows. I think collectively this trilogy is really enjoyable. Even though Spider-Man 3 is not great, I think that maybe Sam Raimi's trilogy as a whole might be a better Spider-Man trilogy, but we're talking MCU, and these Spider-Man films, Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home, feel very MCU, and I think they do a really good job in the grander MCU as well because of how they connect to everything. So as a result, I think it's a really awesome, very watchable trilogy, and that's why it's number 2. And then obviously all I have is number 1, which is, as you've deduced it, the Captain America trilogy. I mean, if you look at Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Captain America Civil War, you're looking at 2 objectively brilliant MCU films. Great superhero movies, awesome direction from the Russo brothers, who would go on to do even better with Infinity War and Endgame. These 2 movies are so good, and they're so good for different reasons too. I think that the First Avenger, let's talk about that first, because I'm not gonna have as many hyped up things to say. First Avenger is a good movie, though it's not perfect. I think some of it is okay, some of it's really good. I think the origins of Steve Rogers becoming Captain America are done really well. I think there's a lot of fun moments in there, and I I really like the ending. I like that it is just a really good coming of age story of a hero and a bit of an interesting period piece in there as well. It's pretty good. But then Winter Soldier came out, and that was just fire. It was an unbelievably good sequel because it told us a new story about things that happened in the past. We got to see the ties between S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra unfolds, and we saw that they were really behind the scenes the whole time. Gradually, we saw some really interesting things happen in S.H.I.E.L.D. there, of course, and Captain America being a part of all this and trying to figure out where he stands and how to make things better, how to be a traditional hero in a world that was anything but traditional now, especially in the modern day. It was an awesome espionage type of thriller. There's some really cool moments. The opening scenes are great. The action is on point. There's just so many memorable scenes in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. It tells a really interesting story, and it's got such a great pace and feel to it. And it feels like a good film, even if it was not, we're not talking about the MCU, but just as a film, I think it's really well made. And Winter Soldier has so many big moments in there, and great character development for Steve and Bucky and Nat and Nick Fury, right? And overall, it is just such a well-made, brilliant comic book movie and movie in general. That was followed up by another fantastic movie. Civil War was my favorite, and it still is one of my favorites. I loved it. I mean, I think Infinity War and Endgame, of course, topped it in some ways. Civil War, for what it is just a brilliant Avengers movie and a Captain America movie. It tells a really, really good follow-up story to where Bucky would end up being and the Winter Soldier, being back again. It tells a fantastic story about repercussions of superheroes causing damage, something that we're always thinking about in the movies when we see all that crazy stuff going down, people dying and all. So I really love the clash between the teammates, between the Avengers, where they were split sides, and this is a big political issue. It's not just something small. It's not just a conversation. It's huge because the world wanted to, control them and make sure that there wasn't more and more repercussions like that and casualties along the way. We saw some really interesting moments, sort of a think piece about where you would stand in that role of a superhero who would also be responsible for damages. And we saw Tony Stark and Steve Rogers lead two sides, which I can kind of get behind both. And so many awesome character moments, introductions to Black Panther and Spider-Man alike. The airport scene was just unbelievable. It was so much fun to see these characters fight. Each character, each moment in there, everyone had a standout personality, and their backstories were explored in there, and the action was awesome. Like I said, the Russo's brothers continued up on what they did so well in Winter Soldier with Civil War, and I think it is just so well made. It says so much about the characters, and not just Captain America, but really the Avengers. And because it works so well as an Avengers movie, but also as a story about Cap and who he is and Bucky and stuff and their relationship, I think that it is a great third Captain America movie. Ultimately, this is just a trilogy that is so good. Even the first Avenger, while it's not as good as the second two movies for Captain America, still, I think it's a really good film. Collectively, we see such an awesome journey for Steve Rogers and so many great moments along the way. That is why it's easily my number one favorite trilogy of the 4 trilogies we've gotten so far in the MCU. So yeah, this was just a fun video I thought of kind of last minute, and I was like, you know what if I ranked all the trilogies? Because now that we've gotten the Spider-Man trilogy, there's a lot of ways to look at these films. When you see them as a trilogy, it's different from looking at them in the grand scheme, because you have to see how they develop the characters and how they work together as a trilogy and where they go from the first one and stuff like that. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. What's your favorite of these 4 MCU trilogies? How would you rank them? Thanks for watching, guys. Consider subscribing. I'm kind of on a roll making some MCU content. I did a Spider-Man No Way Home spoiler talk. I've been ranking the Spider-Man movies, ranking the Disney Plus MCU shows, and I've got a lot more to come. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for me, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you all in the next video.